Awesome. Like you said, I'm Timothy Buck, talking about why accessible email matters. A little bit about me. This is me and my wife, Alyssa. She's an artist in San Francisco. I'm a product manager as my day job, also a podcaster and writer. And you can find my podcast at accessible.fm if you're interested. With that, let's jump into what is accessible email. Can I get a couple people maybe just to raise your hands and share what you think accessible email is? Anybody? Yeah?
Email that can be read by a reader for people who are visually impaired.
Yeah, that's good. An email that can be used by, I need to repeat this for the recording. So email that can be used by people who need to use a screen reader. That's right. I think there was another hand behind her.
It's also for people who are colorblind.
Yes, people who are colorblind. Right. Yep.
With situational limitations.
Yep. Yeah, that's really good. Situational reasons why they need accessibility. I'm going to share my definition of it. This is a combination from a bunch of different things. So I can't claim this as purely mine, but I've just kind of pulled it together from different definitions that I found over the years. Email that your recipients can access and understand. That sounds super broad, but it's true. Accessible email is email that your recipients can access and understand. And that is foundational for whatever you're trying to do, whether you're trying to sell something or you need them to know something for a legal reason or whatever you're doing, you need them to be able to access it and understand it, whoever your recipient happens to be. And if you don't get that right, you're not going to have success. I'm going to add one more bit to this, which is regardless of disabilities. So accessible email is email that your recipients can access and understand regardless of disabilities. And this is the part where most people focus. As you can see, like a lot of the answers were around specific disabilities because that's a really important part of making email accessible. But accessible emails is broader than that. It's more foundational than that. It's making sure your email works for every person and in every situation that they may be in. And if you can do that, then you will find more success. So how many people actually need accessible emails? Here's some stats. These are basically 10 years old from the Census Bureau. This will get updated when the next census happens. But at that time, 8 million Americans with vision impairment, 15 million with cognitive impairment, 7 million with some sort of hearing impairment. And here, the World Health Organization just recently did a study on how many people in the world have vision impairment. I don't understand how they came up with this number. That seems really high to me, but that's what they came up with, that 2.2 billion people have some sort of vision impairment in the world. That's like a fourth of the world. And if that's true, then we should be taking that into account when we're sending emails to people. But to answer my main question there, how many people need accessible email? It's 100% of your recipients. And that may sound sort of flippant to an extent, but it's true. All of them need accessible email because when we go back to that definition, accessible email is email that your recipients can access and understand. And that is, without that, the purpose of your email is gone. Whatever you're trying to do becomes useless if they can't access and understand it. Wanted to kind of add this one note here, that designing for everyone actually makes your email better for everyone. And you'll see that as a trend in kind of the things that I explain throughout the rest of this presentation. I'm going to give a lot of concrete examples of what you can do to make your email more accessible. And for each of those, for many of those, there will be additional impacts. Doing this good thing for a smaller population of your recipients is good for them, but it also ends up being good for everybody. Making your email accessible is just good design. It's just a well-designed email. So what can you do about it? Well, what can you do about making your email accessible? There's a whole lot of things you can do, and I'm going to talk about those in just one second. But I think there's one more point I wanted to make before that, that will help you understand how I've structured the way I'm talking through the different things that you can do. And that is the categories of different types of impairments that people may have. They have visual impairments. We saw that in the numbers. A lot of people have different types of visual impairments, and that's a spectrum, right? There are fully blind people. There are people who are colorblind. There are people who wear glasses. There are people in all these different parts of the spectrum there that have different types of visual impairments. All of them matter. Same thing with cognitive impairment. Sometimes this could be very, very young users. This could be very, very old users. This could be people who have some sort of mental illness, but they're still needing to use email. Motor impairments are basically just ability to move your hands, your body, whatever you're doing to control the computer that you're using. And sometimes it can be harder for certain users to do certain things with their email, and we should keep them in mind. And then lastly, hearing. Much like visual, there is a spectrum of people with different hearing abilities, and all of them matter. So with that said, we can dive into, actually, before we dive in, as she mentioned in the back, these impairments are not, when we think of accessibility, we often think of these types of impairments. And that's how I'm going to talk through it, because it's real. It's the best way to categorize this type of work. But there's also situational impairments. So there may be, let's say motor. There may not be that many people in your user base who have that specific impairment. But if somebody has a broken arm, or they're holding their child, or whatever it may be, it can be more difficult to use their phone or their computer, whatever it may be. If they're in a loud room, hearing what's if you have audio in your email, can be really, really difficult. For each of these things, there are situational reasons that a person who may be fully capable would need a more accessible email. So this, again, a lot of people make decisions about investing in accessibility based on the percentage of their population that they think has each of these impairments, but it's actually much broader than that. So now I'm going to go through them in that order. First, visual impairments. What are specific things that you can do with your email to make it more accessible to people with visual impairments? One is start with clear hierarchy. Sounds basic design. You all know this, but it's really, really important for people with visual impairments. Here's an email I got from the Really Good Email site. It gives an example. I think this is from Burrow. At the top, the first thing you're supposed to read is the part in big black letters. The next thing is clearly has a yellow background, is a larger font size, and then if you go to the paragraph, it's smaller text, and the most important information in that paragraph is bolded. This is a way with clear hierarchy to understand what you're supposed to look at. And from a technical perspective, I'm going to talk about the code for just 1 second here. There are some things that are really important for people who use screen readers. And that is using semantic elements. I know some people out here are probably still using tables to lay things out. But if you can switch to using semantic elements like an H1 for the header, an H2 for the secondary header, a P for the paragraph, this is much easier for people who use screen readers to be able to understand what's in your email. And for some of you, you may not know what a screen reader is, but it really just does what it sounds like it does. For people who are completely blind or close to completely blind, they use a screen reader that just reads what's on the screen to them, and they can hear it. They can click forward, and if you go back one slide here, it will first read, here's some need-to-know information. And then they hit next, and it'll say that next piece of information. And if you use a table, or if you don't have it organized in a way that is hierarchically correct, it'll read them out of order, and that will make absolutely no sense to that user. They will be completely confused because your email is not communicating to them. So not only is using clear hierarchy good for everybody, it's good for people who use screen readers, and it's really important. Another thing you can do is if you are using tables, you can use this role presentation, and it tells the screen reader, hey, this isn't an actual table. This isn't a table that's being used to display tabular information. It's instead being used to lay something out. It's a presentation table. And the screen reader will do its best to read it in the way that it thinks is correct. And it's a lot better for those users. So if you are still using tables, please use role presentation. It's better for people using screen readers. Next, for people with visual impairments, check contrast and sizing. Again, this is good for everybody. If you have clear contrast, it's good for everybody. It's easier to read. It's easier to understand. Using font sizes under 14px is no good. The average phone user out there moves their font size up on their phone because it's easier to read, easier to understand. We should be using larger font sizes so that those people can understand and can actually access the emails that you're making. Same thing with contrast. Contrast is just the color difference between the foreground and background. So right here, we have black text on white background. That's very contrasty. If you look over to the visual impairments part of the slide, that's black text on blue background. That's less contrasty, right? And it's harder for certain people to read. There are really good tools to check this. So you don't have to just know what this is. You can go to Web Accessibility in Mind. They have a free contrast checker and a bunch of information here. You can also just Google free contrast checker. There are hundreds of them, and they give you kind of a grade ranking of like A, B, that kind of thing. So you'll know how much contrast you actually have. Next, this is for the colorblind users out there. Don't use color as the only way you communicate something. Colorblind users won't get it. They won't see it. And there's a bunch of different types of color blindness. It's not just red-green, so you can't just make the decision if it's red and green. So the best way to get around this is, yes, using color is really, really important for communicating to a large portion of your audience. But if, for example, you have a paragraph of text and it has a link in it, don't just have the link be a different color, because some users may not see it. Have it be underlined or have some other indication that it's a link. And take that same concept to anything you're communicating. If you're communicating it only through color, part of your audience won't know what you're trying to say. Next, provide alt text for important images. So alt text is just alternative text. With people who are blind, they're using a screen reader. This used to be a huge problem where it would just read the name of the file. It would just say like img_1234.jpg, right? That communicates nothing to the users. Since then, in email in particular, screen readers just skip images. They just don't say anything about it. So if something in your image is important for the user to know, then you need to have alt text. Alt text is just a little tag that describes what's in the image. You put whatever text you want in there, but what's important is don't say like person. Right? That communicates nothing, right? Describe what the image is supposed to be communicating to the user so that they get it, right? It can be a sentence, it can be 3 words, whatever. Communicate to the user as if whatever the image is supposed to be communicating. Next, always use clear link text. Again, this is true for every user, right? If it says click here, that's bad for screen reader users. They don't know where they're going. The way it's described with the screen reader makes this a little bit confusing to them. So tell them what you're actually trying to get them to do. This is, again, good for every user, but particularly good for screen reader users. And then I'm going to say this actually after each section. Test. You'll know this when you're going to send an email. You QA the email so that it actually is doing what it's supposed to be doing. The people are seeing it the way you want it to look in the different email clients. But if you are implementing accessibility, some of these accessibility things, you should check and make sure that it's actually working. Don't just do it once and forget about it. Make sure it's continuing to work for those users. And next, ask for feedback. Again, you know this. Like, that's how you get better. You get feedback. And it's important to ask for feedback. If you can find, if you can find users of yours that have visual impairment, ask them how you're doing. Or you can just, in your general feedback form, make an option for that so that those people can provide that feedback and you can organize it so you know why they were providing that certain specific type of feedback. Next, cognitive impairment. The rest of these are going to be a little bit shorter because in email, maybe not with AMP, once AMP comes around, there will be more that you need to keep in mind. But with normal HTML email, there are fewer things that you can do for these other people groups. But for cognitive impairment, check the reading level of what you've written. You can write things in a way that are really confusing to users who are not like you, right? Like you understand your product really well. You understand what you're working on really well. You're on the inside. It's super clear to you. But if you can check the reading level of it and make sure that it's written in a clear, easy to understand way, it will be better for all of your users. But it will definitely be better for users who have cognitive impairments. There are things like readable.com. I think that's paid. There are probably others. You can check reading level checker, just Google that. You'll find something like that. And they basically just grade the reading level. Is this like master's level? Is this college level, high school level, 8th grade level, 5th grade level, whatever it may be? It's common practice to assume as if you're under 8th grade level or around that, then you're probably good. Especially if you work in something like finance or something like that where the topic is more complicated. It may be harder for you to write it in a way that is as clearly able to be understood, but I think it's important to at least check. If you can look at it, use one of these checkers and see, oh, I'm writing at a PhD level, that's bad, right? Then a lot of your users are not understanding what you're trying to say. And again, this is bad for everybody. This is bad for all of your users because it's harder for them to understand what you're trying to communicate, and they're less likely to read it. They're less likely to pay attention to it because it takes more work. So if you can simplify your language, it's better for everybody. Clear call to actions. Again, it's basic design, it's basic email. You all know this, but I'm repeating it because it's particularly important for people with cognitive impairments. If you have a call to action that is very, very clear, it tells them what you want them to do and how to do it, then they're more likely to use it. They're more likely to understand it, and your email is going to be more successful. Test, use those checkers on every email you write. Just see what your scores are and make sure that your call to actions are actually good on every email you write. And ask people for feedback. Cognitive impairment sometimes gets a bad name. People feel like it's demeaning in some way, but there are people all along the spectrum that need to use your emails. And the cognitive impairment, again, doesn't have to be a mental illness of any sort. There are a bunch of different reasons why they may not understand what you're saying. And so if you can talk to really new email users who are young, or talk to the oldest users of your products who maybe aren't as used to using technology, those are really important people groups to make sure they understand it. Because if you write it in a way that works for them, it's going to be a better email for everybody. Moving on to motor impairments. Build large button and link tap areas. So motor impairment, again, the example of if you're holding a kid, you have a broken arm, you're holding your phone, you're trying to do this, and the tap area is a really tiny button, you're going to miss it, you're going to get annoyed, you're going to give up, you're going to try to hit it and hit the wrong thing. It's going to be frustrating. It's bad for users. No matter if this is an impairment that they have all the time, or if it's somebody who has a situational impairment, it's better if you have big, easy to click buttons. Links is an example where oftentimes people will put links in a paragraph, it'll be a word, and then the next word is a different link, and they're right beside each other. They're really, really hard to tap the difference between those two. You could click the wrong one. Again, if there's anything you can do to not do that, don't do it, so it's clear where they have to click and they don't tap the wrong area or click the wrong area. Again, and I'm repeating this because it's important, actually test these things and ask people for feedback. Moving on to hearing impairment. This one may be a little bit less applicable for many of you, but there are videos and audio that's sent over email or linked to in your emails. And if you can keep them in mind, if your call to action is go watch this video and they click the link and they can't actually hear the video, like that's bad for your user. It's a bad experience. So provide audio transcription. If you have audio only content, provide a transcription under it. This is really basic. You can use something like Descript. This is what I use for my podcast. Basically, they have two options. You can use their auto transcriber, and the computer just tries to transcribe it, and it gets it like 90% correct. There's some parts of it are going to be like way off and funny. So ideally, you'll go through and fix that in their tool. They give you the ability to do that. That's really cheap. It's like a penny a minute or something. Or you can pay basically $1 a minute. That seems to be the average on all the different sites out there to transcribe whatever your audio is. So if you have a 5-minute thing, that's nothing, right? If you have an hour thing, that's still $60. Like your company can spend $60 on transcribing audio. Next is captions. So this is for videos, right? And captions are good for everybody. People like watching Netflix with captions. I know I do. It's nice. If something happens and it's loud, it's nice to be able to continue to understand what's going on. They're just a nice additional affordance for people to consume that content. Captions the same way. Descript does this. The way this works is once you have a transcription of the video, pretty much every video player has the ability to upload a transcription file. I know YouTube does, Vimeo does. Basically everybody has this option. You just upload the file, and that file says at this second in the video, this is the text that should be on the screen. And so it just puts the text up there if they turn on closed captioning. Again, the expense for this is, if it's Descript, it's like $1 a minute. And that $1 a minute is paying somebody there to like listen to it and make sure it's actually right. So that's not bad. It's going to be very, very accurate, like 99% accurate, and it's going to be a good experience to those users. Again, test. But seriously, this is important. And ask for feedback. So I guess the call to action is for everybody here and all the millions and millions of emails that you all are sending is that you make them in a way that your recipients can access and understand regardless of any disabilities they may have. And yeah, you can find me, say hi afterwards. That's it. Any questions? Yep.
What is the best way to do alt tags or descriptions for images if there's an image and text used within the same?
The question was, if there's an image and text, what's the best way to do the alt tag? I would say don't add an alt tag if the image isn't providing new information, right? So if the image is going to the alt text would just be a repeat of the header, that's a waste, because now the person listening to it is going to hear, we have 10% off, followed by we have 10% off. Like that's just duplicating it. It's not useful. So don't use an alt tag in that situation. If it is actually separate information that's going to be different and interesting to the listener, then describe it. Yes?
How do you feel about putting alt text on design elements like the horizontal rule, the image, or anything like that? Do you think that's of value or not?
So the question was adding alt text to things like horizontal rules. I don't think that's particularly valuable. If you did, you may be able to, I wouldn't say horizontal rule. You could use it as a way to say, there's a new section. That could be valuable. I guess it depends on the situation. Any other questions? Yes?
To prevent widows, a lot of times
Yes.
designers will want non-printed spaces so that it's a widow. What are your feelings on that? How can you educate them about?
Yep, so non-printing spaces to prevent widows, does that impact screen readers? I don't believe it does. I think screen readers they're not going to like mention spaces. So I think that should be fine. Yeah. Any other questions?